If I may respectfully ask, please, that we hold all comments in the presentation. I will take questions. During the presentation, I will only take clarification questions, short clarification questions. If there's something that I may have said that's confusing, I'm happy to listen to comments at the end. I would just prefer, it's far easier for the audience, because it's very difficult to sometimes hear when you're sitting in the audience, when other people are speaking out there. And so, at the end, I will take questions, but only questions. And then if you have comments, longer comments, I welcome them. I would like to hear them after the presentation. So, who's heard of the two-state solution? Show of hands. Okay. Not the Canadian one. The one in Israel. Okay. So that's what this presentation is about. So this is what we're going to do today. There is a handout going around, so hopefully everybody has one. If you don't, if you put your hand up, one of the volunteers, I'm sure can hand you one. There's some in the... Thanks. All right. So we're going to look at the two-state solution. The two-state solution, just to give a little brief introduction, is the mainstream world policy solution in regards to how we get past this obstacle that's been facing the Palestinian Arabs and the Israeli people. And actually, you know, when I say Israeli people, that includes approximately 1 million Palestinian Arabs as well. I don't know how many people know that. They make up about 20% of Israel's population. So this is what we're going to look at this solution today. And we're going to talk about whether it's a reasonable solution, whether it actually has a reasonable chance of success, and what it means. So I'm going to start by giving you some background.
It happened on April 25th, 1920. Representatives of the great powers who triumphed in World War I met in the Italian town of San Remo to divide the Middle Eastern lands they conquered. 90 years later to the day, Christians and Jews gathered on the same spot to commemorate the event. The leaders of the great powers who met here in San Remo 90 years ago are long gone, but their decisions made history and transformed the Middle East. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, they called for the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in an area called Palestine. Before its defeat in World War I, the 400-year-old Ottoman Empire spread throughout the Middle East. In San Remo, England, France, Italy, and Japan, along with the United States as an observer, divided the empire into 3 mandates: Iraq, Syria, and Palestine. France would oversee Syria, while Iraq and Palestine fell under Great Britain. The resolution also included the Balfour Declaration, written by England's Lord Balfour in 1917, which called for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. One English diplomat, Lord Curzon, called it Israel's Magna Carta. Thomas Sandel of the European Coalition of Israel helped organize the 90th anniversary of the signing of the San Remo Resolution.
Chaim Weizmann said at the time, you can say that the Israeli state was born on 25th of April 1920 in San Remo, because that was the significance of it.
And the San Remo Resolution was the preeminent document for Jewish rights to the land of Israel.
Howard Reed, author of the Legal Foundation and Borders of Israel under international law, says the resolution established several precedents. signed by 51 countries. Exclusive legal and political rights in Palestine went to the Jews, while those same rights in the rest of the Middle East went to the Arabs.
The Arabs got the lion's share. I mean, they got Syria, which was subsequently divided into Syria and Lebanon. They got all of Mesopotamia and all of Arabia. And this is what Balfour himself said. He said, why are you confining? You're getting all these lands, and we're granting a niche. He called it a niche to the Jewish people who were getting it Palestine.
Greed also says the 1920 San Remo resolution supersedes later UN resolutions.
There is such a thing in international law. Once you recognize a certain situation and the matter is executed, you can't change it. The UN General Assembly exceeded its authority, exceeded its jurisdiction. It did not have the power to divide the country.
But what about those contested Israeli settlements in the West Bank? Many people, including the current Secretary General of the UN, say they are illegal.
Settlements are covered in Article 6 of the Mandate for Palestine, and the legal international document of the Mandate for Palestine, and clearly says that not only the Jews have the right to settlement, but the world has the obligation to help them to settle.
This legal right of Jews to build in the West Bank or East Jerusalem is little understood in the world today. It's a situation that Thomas Sandel hopes to remedy.
We feel that we have a historical duty to just bring the facts on the table, because we are here dealing with historical facts, and this should be known, this should be taken into consideration in the public debate.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, San Remo, Italy.
Okay, so this is a very big topic. I'm going to do a very short, standing on one foot, summary of what you just heard, show you in pictures, take you through quickly with some of the pictures in your handout, and give you some background. I'm doing another course later in November that's much longer than this, if you want to hear the whole story. Basically, the state of Israel got its birth in the early part of the 20th century, not in 1948. Yeah, it became an entity then, but I mean, in terms of legal processes, it happened much earlier than that. And this is an important part of where you should start the story, at least in our contemporary era. Okay, so if you look at picture 1 on your handout, you'll see a picture that looks like that. Okay? What is that? As a result of this conference that happened in San Remo, which, by the way, the people that were there were not just anybody. They were the Supreme Court of the world at the time. And for those people who are familiar with their history of the era, 1 year before that, they met in a place called Paris, at a Paris Peace Conference after World War I, and they changed the entire map of Europe. And their decisions became law. And some of these treaties are quite famous, and you're familiar with them. Treaty of Versailles, Treaty of Saint-Germain, if you studied your history. So they didn't have time to get to the Middle East, the former Ottoman Empire, and decide what they were going to do with it. Okay? Prior to their decisions, the Middle East did not look like it does today. There weren't a bunch of nation states called Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and Palestine, Israel, and Iraq. Those entities did not exist. Okay? We think they've been there forever, but they haven't. Okay? So a year later, a year after the Paris Peace Conference, they met in a place called San Remo, which is in the Italian Riviera, quite beautiful. And they came to some decisions. And later, those decisions became part of an international document called the Mandate for Palestine. If you look at the picture, you'll see that Palestine is much bigger in that first picture, the all-white one, picture 1 on your handout. It's much bigger than the area that you now recognize as Israel. So what happened? Well, you'll have to look at this picture, which you don't have. A year later, Britain, who had gotten the authority to run the mandate, they had certain obligations under it. They decided to chop off the eastern part of that territory, and that became the current state of Jordan. And what was left, everything west of the Jordan River, was just a clarification question on whether it became Palestine and whether it became Israel. It didn't get the name of the state of Israel until 48, when the first time really appeared the Declaration of Independence, Israel's Declaration of Independence. They called themselves the state of Israel. But you can see in shape, it certainly is the shape that we now recognize with the state of Israel. And the source of the name Palestine, we don't have a lot of time, we don't really have the time to get into here, but that was the name the British used, and that was the name of the mandate, so it was just labeled that. There was a mandate for Palestine, there was a mandate for Syria, which ultimately became the countries of Syria and Lebanon. There was a mandate for Iraq, it was Mesopotamia, but became Iraq. And then the Palestine mandate became Palestine, and then what became first Transjordan and then Jordan. So we're now talking 1921 at this point, which is, math is not my specialty, 27 years before it really got labeled Israel. Thank you for the question. Okay, so this situation remained relatively status quo until, as you know, well, you may not know, but Britain decided to abandon its mandate. It was too much trouble for them, expense and otherwise, and certainly anybody that knows the history can appreciate that it was no easy task for Britain. They were running out of money. We're after now the Second World War, and they wanted to hand everything off to the United Nations. So the United Nations, who is a fledgling organization at this point in time, now faced a significant problem. They sent a group of people, a committee out, and they came back with some recommendations. And one of the recommendations was that they partition what was Palestine still into a Jewish and Arab state. Okay? The yellow, okay, being the Arab state, and the white, okay, so I'm just going to go back here for a second. Can you see this? And now it changes. Okay? So the white was going to be the new Jewish state. Yes? Okay, so it really wasn't, that's how it's labeled on the picture, but it was Palestine. It really became Palestine. It was never on the east side. The Jordanians and the Arabs did not call it like Arab Palestine. So, but, okay. It was to be the Jewish National Home. Right. Okay, good question. I'm going to repeat the question so that everybody can, I don't know if everybody can hear. The question is, basically, if you'll permit me to sum up, where were we? All right, if what happened in San Remo happened just a couple of decades earlier, why didn't we, the Zionist organization, or whoever was representing the Jewish people at the time, stand up, the Jewish agency, and say, hold on, wait a minute now. We've already got our state according to international law. Why are you now partitioning it again? And here is the simple answer that's not so simple. We're just coming out of World War II. There's just been a Holocaust. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews sitting in displacement persons camp. And at that point in time, the number one concern of the leaders of what is now called the Yishuv still is how do we get these hundred thousands of survivors to safety? The doors have been closed by Great Britain for a while. Let's just get our land, let's get everybody here, and let's try and save their lives. So they were under a lot of duress. They weren't really in a very strong position at this point in time to basically make any demands. So we're going to have to move on, and I'll take the question afterwards. But that's basically the answer. They weren't really in a position where they had a lot of strength at this point in time. They had. Okay, so I'll answer the question. I will answer the question. I'll answer the question shortly. But the bottom line is really simply, the other world leaders just fought a world war, and the second time in 2 decades, and this was not their most major concern. Okay? So they opted for partition. Okay, but thank you. All right, well, we know what happened after that. Okay, Israel was attacked by all of its neighbors. They won. Okay? And this is what the map kind of looked like after the 48 war. Okay, so you can see that this area, if you remember, this was part of, let's say, the Palestine after it was partitioned. This area then came under Jordanian control, and I don't know if you can see a little strip here, but there is one where the laser is. Part B became under Egyptian control, and that became Gaza, the Gaza Strip. Okay, so in 49, an agreement was signed between Israel and the Jordanians, and it was called an armistice agreement. And basically, the armistice agreement very simply was, we agree not to shoot you if you don't cross this line. Anybody that's old enough to remember the Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd, if you cross this line, you go. If you cross this line, you go. Okay, so they just basically put a line in the sand that says, if you don't cross the line, we won't attack you. So it became an armistice line. But it's important because that armistice line became known as the Green Line. And the UN has now become, and the world has now begun to use that line as a border reference. Okay, so I want you to listen to a mentor of mine who I consider a world expert on what the armistice line was.
You're looking now at the extension of the borders of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, that took place in 1967 and then 1993. And you'll note that little yellow dot or square in the middle, right in the middle, that's the old city. What I want you to understand is the location of the Green Line. The Green Line is referred to in so many documents and articles and resolutions as if it was sacred, as if it was meant to be legally the source of rights and obligations of Israelis and Jews and others. I disagree with that, and I'll explain why. But look at where the Green Line is. Article 2 of the agreement that was made in 1949 between Israel and Jordan, this is a cornerstone of my argument, specifies that there's no provision, even though there's a line where they'll stop the fighting and they'll divide up territory, that there's no provision in the agreement that's in any way supposed to prejudice the rights, claims, or positions of either party. How clear is that? Do you need to go to law school for 3 years or more to understand what that says? The Green Line is only relevant in respect to the law of war and where the parties stop fighting. It is not a source of rights and obligations. What would happen if Jerusalem was divided according to the Green Line, as is demanded by so many of the interested parties? Look at it. All that would be left is the dark blue segment, East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, and the light blue is the adjacent territory of the Jewish state. And what's left of Jerusalem, you'll see, will be completely surrounded by the light green, which is the Palestinian state, and the dark green would be the capital of the new Palestinian state. When I speak about these things with journalists and with different ones around the world, and I show them this picture, usually the reaction is, oh, I didn't realize that the ramifications would be so significant.
Okay, so now we come, situation remains relatively status quo. All right, you now understand a little bit about the history up to the point 48, and now what territory is sitting in whose hands. Okay, situation remains relatively status quo. Nothing really remains status quo for more than a couple of days in the Middle East, but relative status quo until 1967. And then Israel is attacked again. Actually, we launched the preemptive strike, but there were numerous acts of war that happened before Israel launches their preemptive strike. And at the end of the 67 war, the Sinai. We end up with that strip, the Gaza Strip. We end up with this area on the west bank of the Jordan River. This is why it's called the West Bank. There was no such thing as West Bank in history up until this era. It was Judea and Samaria. It was essentially names of Jewish tribes in the ancient Israelite time. Okay? But no West Bank until now. This is the West Bank territory. We also take area up north, the Golan Heights. Okay? So significant territorial gain in 67. One thing that's interesting you might want to notice that Golda Meir mentioned is, the argument that our settlements in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip have been the result of numerous hostilities. There's a source of much Arab hostility. Really kind of goes out the door when you take a look at the situation in 67 when they had all that territory and they attacked us anyway. Make sense? Okay. All right, so moving on. We now come after the 67 war, the United Nations meets and they come up with a resolution. Okay, we're almost coming to the end of the background. It's called Resolution 242. And what it says is it has a couple of demands. It was built on this principle of constructive ambiguity, for any lawyers in the room. Okay? It was designed intentionally to have gray areas, because the object was to let the parties themselves figure out the solution. Okay? But it did have a couple of criteria in it. Oh, excuse me. Israel was not asked, but the obligation was on them to withdraw from territories. This is the first time you hear the word occupied in the 67 war, but they were entitled to have secure boundaries and the right to live in peace. So the question is, are those two things possible to have together at the same time? Right? What is occupation? Let's talk about that for 1 second. I'm going to give you just a simple layman's definition. Occupation in international law basically means when a hostile army takes over territory that it's not the owner of. Meaning, you take over a house that you don't own. You're occupying it. So the question is, and it's a legitimate question, is that true? Well, if what I just showed you about San Remo is actually law, then can you really be the occupier of a territory that you already own? Okay. Pardon me? Oh, so let me, excellent. So the question, comment was, well, what about the Sinai? And that's true. Okay, so we have to talk about which territories came under San Remo. And so, just to go back 1 slide. Okay, so it's Israel per se as an entity would be occupying by international law the Sinai, and they would by law be occupying the Golan Heights. Okay, the rest of the territory, the question would be if San Remo's law with the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, would they really be occupying? So, everybody clear on the question? Because one could certainly make it's a legitimate claim to say Israel was occupying Sinai and possibly the Golan Heights. So if that's the only question we're talking about, then you're right. So there's one other thing that you should also understand about occupation according to international law. You don't necessarily have to give back occupied territory if giving it back is a threat to your existence. Hence the other part of Resolution 242, the right to live in peace. Okay? Now, we know we gave back the Sinai already, and in a sense, we really gave back Gaza too. There's still some issues there. Okay? And so, the real question still remains with the Golan Heights. I mean, should we be giving that back, even though we are occupying it? Is that a legal occupation, meaning because giving it back is a threat to our existence, or is it an illegal occupation, meaning we just basically took it? So I'll take only quick questions, and then we have to move on. So there's one here first.
How can you give back land that Palestinians in there for sovereign?
Okay.
Give back.
Excellent. Okay, so that's another dimension to the occupation, another category. The question was, how can you give back land to somebody who's not the owner of it? And so that brings up another important point in international law. there's another criteria that the land that you took has to have been taken from a sovereign owner. And who was the last sovereign owner, according to international law, of the West Bank? The Ottoman Empire. In 1923, they relinquished their rights. So that's another fair point. So of course, we have two issues. Okay, I know there's going to be a lot of questions, and I'll probably have to take some of them at the end, and you forgive me because there's a lot to go through today that I want you to see. Okay, so if I could ask you just to hang on, I'm going to move forward. Okay? Okay, we went through this. All right. Israeli policy from 67 to 2000. So I'm just going to, so I don't forget anything in my notes, I'm going to go through a very quick synopsis so that you understand. Okay, Israel's now in a situation, if we just focus on the West Bank and Gaza, where they have... I think the battery ran out. Can everybody hear me? Okay, so Israel was stuck at this point in time in a situation where they had two issues to contend with. Number one, they wanted to find a policy where they could avoid two things. Number one, they wanted to avoid having to exercise control and authority over a large Palestinian population. Number two, they did not want to return to insecure pre-1967 borders, all right? As weapons advance and technology advances, you're far more at risk nowadays than you were, let's say, 47 or 48. Even though they were quite vulnerable then, it gets worse as time goes on. Rockets have farther ranges, they do more damage. So, with these aims, and trying to find a solution to this, Israel did not annex the West Bank, and they did not annex Gaza because they didn't want to have control over a large population. But they did have to maintain a military presence in order to have security. Now, one thing that's important to understand is if you look at all the administrations for decades, you would have never heard Begin, who signed a peace treaty with Sadat and Egypt, nor Rabin, who is a very strong peace advocate, ever say the words Palestinian state. Okay? This was not part of their dialogue generally. They understood the situation. They understood that you could not have a state in the sense of the word of a sovereign entity with a military and so on and so forth, sitting in that territory, the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. Okay? And I'll show you why in a second. Okay? So this was not part of any Israeli policy until 2000. Okay, now there's an event that happens before that. All right, so along the time in these decades, while Israel is trying to figure out a strategy to move forward with the Palestinians, there's a plan done up by Alon, okay, the Alon plan, which basically took a look at the area of the West Bank and said, is there a way that we could take a look at where most of the Arab population is and start to give them some autonomy? And this was the strategy which Israel was proceeding with. Can we have the Palestinian Arabs have some sense, have their own autonomy where we don't have to govern them, while at the same time, right, still maintaining our security? And after Alon, there was another guy named Bailey who also just took the plan a little bit further, and this was kind of the formula that started the peace process at Oslo. And I'm going to show you a picture. I think it's on your handout, and it's picture 3. So the West Bank was divided into these subdivisions, into these different colors. And if you look, you can see maybe up here, the brown was going to be given, those were the areas that were going to come under full Palestinian authority. The yellow was going to be shared between Israel and Palestinians. This is called the Declaration of Principles. It was an interim agreement with the goal of the Palestinians having basically autonomous regions that they govern themselves. And the white was going to stay under Israeli military administration for security purposes, and you'll see why very soon. So what changed? In 2000, Ehud Barak went to Washington to try and sign an agreement with Yasser Arafat, Camp David. Okay? Now, what happened here created a paradigm that has put us in a difficult situation, right? Why? Okay? Arafat offered 90+%, okay? Palestinian, sorry, Barak. What did I say? Arafat? Thank you. Barak offered the majority of the West Bank, all the regions, including the white parts that you saw on the map I just showed you. Why did he do it? Barak was a general, okay? He understood, he knew the situation from a military perspective, okay, and the threat to the security, but I believe that the reason that he offered it is because he wanted us to show Arafat's true intentions. Look, I'm going to give you almost everything you're asking for, and I'll bet you you're going to turn it down. And he was right. Arafat turned it down. As one of Arafat's chief negotiators later said, he could have offered him everything except the Temple Mount, and he would have turned it down. So this is the situation we're dealing with. So fantastic. We revealed Arafat's true intentions, but now we got stuck in a paradigm that the world has jumped on for the last 12 years, which is, oh, Palestinian state in all of the West Bank. And this is the situation that we find ourselves in today. So from that point on, we basically faced what has been called the two-state solution, which, if we're referring to the West, we'll leave it as the West Bank and Gaza basically get turned over to the Palestinian Authority, and we keep the rest, okay, with some land exchanges. Okay, so let's now move to very contemporary times, and let's move forward from here and see whether the two-state solution is a reasonable fix of the problem that we're in.
The only resolution is for the aspirations of both sides to be met through two states where Israelis and Palestinians each live in peace and security.
People know who that is, right?
The United States believes that negotiations should result in two states with permanent Palestinian borders with Israel, Jordan, and Egypt, and permanent Israeli borders with Palestine. We believe the borders of Israel and Palestine should be based on the 1967 lines with mutually agreed swaps, so that secure and recognized borders are established for both states. I am aware that these steps alone will not resolve the conflict, because two wrenching and emotional issues will remain: the future of Jerusalem and the fate of Palestinian refugees.
So the Obama administration, basically echoed by the rest of the world, is there's going to be two states based on the 1960s, the pre-1967 borders. This is a paradigm that basically got established from the meetings with Ehud Barak and the offer that he put on the table, and this is the situation we're in today. So what we've got to find out is whether this is a reasonable solution, whether it has a chance of working or not. Let's take a look. First, the question that I have is a two-state solution a Palestinian goal? You can't see this, but this is an ad that came out in National Geographic that was put out by the Palestinian Authority, their travel and tourism department. And in the little writings, if you could see it, it basically mentions that the area of Palestine includes Jerusalem, Jaffa, Hebron, okay? And basically includes Haifa, all the towns in Israel, which means that their definition of Palestine does not really mean West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. It means all of Israel, okay? But let's just move past that for 1 second. Let's assume that they really do want a two-state solution, okay? Where they're prepared to accept the state in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. Is it reasonable to believe this will lead to peace and security for both Israel So in May of last year, Prime Minister Netanyahu was invited to speak at Congress. I'm sure people here saw part or all of his speech. I want to read you a couple of excerpts from it. Listen to what he said. In recent years, Israel withdrew from South Lebanon and Gaza, but we didn't get peace. Instead, we got 12,000 rockets fired from those areas on our cities, on our children, by Hezbollah and Hamas. So if Israel simply walked out of the territories, meaning the West Bank, the flow of weapons into a future Palestinian state would be unchecked. Missiles fired from it could reach virtually every home in Israel in less than a minute. I want you to think about that. Imagine that right now, we all had less than 60 seconds to find shelter from an incoming rocket. Would you live that way? Would anyone live that way? Well, we aren't going to live that way either. The truth is that Israel needs unique security arrangements because of its unique size. Israel on the 1967 lines would be only 9 miles wide. So it's absolutely vital that Israel maintain a long-term military presence along the Jordan River. Solid security arrangements on the ground are necessary not only to protect the peace, they're necessary to protect Israel in case the peace unravels. For in our unstable region, no one can guarantee that our peace partners today will be there tomorrow. And when I say tomorrow, I don't mean some distant time in the future, I mean tomorrow. Okay? If you're paying attention to what's gone on in the Arab world over the last 2 years, okay, what's going on in Syria right now, it really does mean we don't know that what's going to be tomorrow. So let's take a look and see what Netanyahu is talking about and whether there's grounds for his claims.
The government hoped that evicting some 9,000 Israelis from the Gaza communities would improve security. Instead, Israel got war.
In exchange, we got more missiles launched at Israel.
So you can hear all kinds of reports in the newspapers about what life is like, and there's obviously no way I can do justice to what it's like to live in southern Israel right now, but that small clip at least gives you some perspective of what some people have to go through numerous times a day. And you hear mothers telling stories about 15 seconds. Sometimes I have to choose which kid I pick up and run to safety. I mean, whether a rocket hits and there's casualties or not, I mean, this psychological torture that's being delivered on a daily basis, okay, that's not a life. Okay? Okay, let's move on. So whatever solution we're talking about, there needs to be some serious security considerations. And so we need to understand, all right, what Israel's security needs are. So if you haven't seen these pictures before, I think you're going to be surprised. And this is now, you can refer to your handout on the next, on pictures 4 to 9 on the next few pages. Topographically, I don't know how many people are aware, right? But if you look at picture 4, I'm going to have to get my instruments, so sorry. What Netanyahu was talking about is, I was with some friends in Netanya in June, and it's 9 miles at its narrowest point from the point of where the West Bank ends, okay, that green line ends, to the coast of Israel. That's what Netanyahu is referring to about a 9-mile strip. Now that doesn't tell the whole story, because what you need to also understand is the topography of this area. And we're talking about a mountain range. Okay? So you'll take a look at the next pictures, and you're going to see why that's significant. Okay, that is what the elevation looks like as you move from the coastal mountain range, okay, that small strip, to the coast of Israel, where 70 to 80% of Israel's population lives, where most of its industry are, where power stations are, where Ben Gurion Airport is. This is Tel Aviv, okay, seen from those mountains. Now, you can see Tel Aviv in the background. This is with a telephoto lens, okay, from an Arab village in that mountain range. Now, I don't think you need to really be a genius to figure out that if that becomes part of an Arab state, with the freedom to basically do the same things that are happening in the Gaza Strip, we don't have much of an opportunity to defend ourselves. I apologize for the graphicness of that image, if that's even a word, but this is the reality. That's a view of the Hadera power station, again, from that coastal mountain range. Not a hard target to hit. When you look at the topography of Israel, it's very alarming. The Gaza Strip, at least, is on lowland, and there may be, 16, 20, 30, 40 kilometers in some cases to major population centers. That is not the case when you're talking about that coastal mountain range in the West Bank. That's a shot of Ben Gurion Airport from what is now a small village, right, a Jewish settlement that isn't part of the settlement agreement. It's just not big enough in any future Palestinian state. If you use the green line, that would not be ours. Do you think it would be possible, really, to fly a plane out of Ben Gurion Airport with that kind of range? Okay, this is a picture of Tel Aviv suburb. It's not really a suburb. Ra'anana. People have heard of it? And Kfar Saba? Okay, so hold on for 1 second. This is West Bank. This is Highway 6, for anybody that's been to Israel, and the main highways it runs. This, just so you know, is about the size from here to, let's say, the main centers. It's basically a few football fields. I mean, there is no Iron Dome for that. And so we're not talking about large geographical areas here. We're talking about topographical problems and the fact that you're basically talking about one side of Bathurst Street to another.
Every state has the right of self-defense and to secure borders to protect itself from hostile invasions and terror. Israel is a small state surrounded by Arab countries 650 times its size, some of which are large bases of global terror. Only 44 miles separate between the Jordan Valley and the Mediterranean Sea. After the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israel was attacked by 4 armies on 3 fronts, United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 stated that Israel was entitled to new defensible borders to replace the previous fragile lines from which it was attacked. What are Israel's defensible borders? What are its essential security needs? The Jordan Rift Valley, Israel's eastern frontier, forms a natural barrier between Israel and the countries of Jordan, Iraq, and Iran. The Jordan Valley rises from an area that is 1,200 feet below sea level to a hilly ridge of up to 3,000 feet, creating a steep 4,200-foot virtual wall opposite any force attacking from the east. The growing threat of global jihad activity near Israel's borders requires it to prevent infiltrations of terrorists and weapons. When Israel left the Philadelphia corridor in Gaza, it became a highway for the infiltration of terrorists and the flow of hundreds of tons of ammunition and weaponry from all over the Arab world aimed at Israeli civilians. The Jordan Valley is the equivalent of Gaza's Philadelphia corridor in the West Bank. To defend itself, Israel must retain control over the Jordan Valley. This is Israel's mountain ridge, rising up to 3,000 feet. It dominates Israel's major coastal cities, where more than 70% of its population, 80% of its industry, and all of its airfields and seaports are located. Missiles launched from the Judean hills pose an immediate threat to Jerusalem, Israel's capital. Israel's only international airport, Ben Gurion, would be in the range of even primitive rockets, while all planes taking off and landing would be threatened by shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles. More advanced weaponry would be able to hit virtually any point in Israel. If Israel were forced back to the 1949 armistice lines, the Green Line, the country's width would be reduced to a narrow 9-mile waistline that would be impossible to defend. That's why any future arrangement must include Israeli control over key areas of the mountain ridge and a demilitarized Palestinian state.
I've given you the link to that, and as well as the other pictures, you have them on at the last page of your handout, so I'm going to move on so you can watch the rest of that yourself, but I think you get the message. All right, so a couple of last points, and then we'll do a conclusion. This is a little clearer picture of what happens if, under the Green Line, which the Palestinians are asking for in their state, if they divided Jerusalem. All right? This is whether people were aware or not that meant that the old city, the holiest site in Judaism, would not be part of Israel. Okay? Now, you saw the topographical, only mentioned it. Okay, what I showed you about the mountain range and the coast is the same in Jerusalem. The eastern part of Jerusalem, for anybody that's ever been there, if anybody wants to go and take a remarkable strategic tour, I can show you how the topography in Jerusalem is also just as problematic for us if we give up the West Bank, okay? The security risk, because topographically the high points, many of the high points, if not many of them, I think even most in some places, would not be in our hands. Okay? So we have a physical problem. We also have a spiritual problem. Okay, so some people may say, yeah, but it's for the sake of peace. So let me read to you something that Natan Sharansky wrote. It should be noted that if we totally relinquish every value for the sake of peace, we won't have peace either. Just as in the past, this time too, the Palestinians will interpret such a relinquishing of what constitutes our very identity as a tremendous weakness that calls for war. The values symbolized by Jerusalem are not only religious in nature. One doesn't have to be religious to understand that without our historical connection to Jerusalem, without the link to the past, without the feeling of continuity with the ancient kingdoms of Israel, for whom the Temple Mount was the center of existence, we really are foreign invaders and colonialists in this country. One doesn't have to be religious in order to understand that relinquishing the Temple Mount is a justification of the Palestinian argument. You have no right to exist in this country. You have no connection to it. Get out of here. One doesn't have to be religious in order to understand that relinquishing the Temple Mount is not only relinquishing the past, it is primarily relinquishing the future of all of us here. Without Jerusalem, Israel will become just another Jewish community, one of many in the world, like that of New York, London, or Toronto, except more dangerous, less wealthy, and less comfortable. It will not be the center of the Jewish world, not the focus of its existence, just one more community. And if that's the case, why continue to live in it? For what? In the name of what? One last quote. Golda Meir, you can find this in her book, My Life. I highly recommend it as a read. I wish to say that from the time I came to Palestine as a young woman, we've been forced to choose between what is more dangerous and what is less dangerous for us. At times, we have all been tempted to give in to various pressures and to accept proposals that might guarantee us a little quiet for a few months, or maybe even a few years. But that could only lead us eventually into even greater peril. We've always been faced by the question, which is the greater danger? And we're still in that situation, or perhaps an even greater one. The world is harsh, selfish, and materialistic. It is insensitive to the sufferings of small nations. Even the most enlightened of governments, democracies that are led by decent leaders who represent fine, decent people, are not much inclined today to concern themselves with the problems of justice and international relations. At a time when great nations are capable of knuckling under to blackmail and decisions are being made on the basis of big power politics, we cannot always be expected to take their advice. And therefore, we must have the capacity and the courage to go on seeing things as they really are and act on our own most fundamental instincts for self-preservation. So to those who ask, what of the future? I still have only one answer. I believe that we will have peace with our neighbors, but I'm sure that no one will make peace with a weak Israel. If Israel is not strong, there will be no peace. So here's some of my concluding thoughts. A two-state solution. Is it possible? In theory, potentially. Okay? Not in the way the mainstream world is talking about it. No, because without that coastal mountain range and without the eastern portion of that area of the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria, we don't have a chance to defend ourselves. But if Israel were to keep those areas, the white areas, okay, in the security areas, in the coastal mountain range on the left there, and on the right in the Jordan Rift Valley, could the Palestinians have an autonomous government of their own? Yes, and absolutely as a people, they deserve that, okay, as all peoples do. They have the right to self-determine, but not if their self-determination comes at the price of our existence. So these are my final thoughts. I might have time for a quick question or two. All right, thank you very much. And let me also mention that if you want a much bigger presentation, on November 22nd, on Thursday nights for 3 weeks, I'm starting a course at the Village School. It'll be a mini course, and you'll get a much bigger picture of the whole thing. But for today, that's a good introduction. Okay, I'll maybe take one or two quick questions, and then we'll let Rabbi Spiro come up, because I know you're going to want to hear him speak his full talk. So. One at a time, because my memory is such that I'm planning my own surprise parties these days. So I only deal with. Okay. So the question is, why? I'm just going to short paraphrase. Why do we let the argument that we're occupiers carry the day? Okay? And the answer to me, it's more multifaceted than this, but let me give a short answer. In my opinion, we as a Jewish people do not know our story. 90+% of Jewish people in the world, almost every audience I teach has never heard of San Remo. They have no idea what our rights there. And they really don't have an understanding of what's going on. Just to give you an even more shocking example, I basically told a couple of our new neighbors from Israel who were from the suburbs of Tel Aviv. They grew up there. They were born there, about the proximity of this West Bank and the threat. They were like, no, it's not that close. I mean, yes, it is. No, it isn't. I'll show you some pictures. Okay. Wow, it's really close, right? I mean, you go to Israel and you find that there's a number of people who have no idea what the situation is. We don't know our story, right? So, okay, one quick one. Yeah. Yes. Okay, the green line, the armistice agreement, okay, that armistice line became the green line, and everything that's not at the east of that area, that little peanut-shaped, kidney-shaped area, is considered pre-67 borders without Gaza. Okay, one more, and then we'll stop. So, sorry.
Just one more thing at the end.
So the comment was, you know, pre-1967 there really was no Palestinian people, and isn't that something that really takes away from the strength of the argument? Because why are we talking about a people that was like a concept that was made up? Here's my thought. Okay? In the first place, I agree with your chronology. In the second place, I'm not sure that at this point in time it really serves any benefit to remove the term. In my bigger course, I do explain the whole evolution of it, but I'll tell you why I don't attack it. You know, there are Jewish histories of professors of history who are basically claiming there's no such thing as a Jewish people, right? So one of the arguments of mine that we're a people is the fact that we identify. We have a right to identify and to be part of a group, and we have an identity, we have a history. They're identifying as a people. And so no matter what we do at this point in time, we're not going to win any argument with them that they don't exist. If anything, in my opinion, it's just going to incite audiences that I speak to around the world. Okay, let's acknowledge they identify as a people. They're separate from the Arabs, and the Arab world has gone out of their way to make them separate people, right? Let's not make the situation any worse by not validating the fact that there's an entity there. I'm not going to go one step further and say that this entity that came up in the 60s has claims that put our existence at risk, but I will validate the fact that there are people there who identify as Palestinians, and let's at least acknowledge that. Although I hear what you're saying, I don't think it takes away from the strength of our argument, but I do in my course talk about the evolution. We just didn't have time to cover everything today, and I agree with you. It is a more contemporary group, okay? And it doesn't have our history. But I think, you know, you'll get more people being open to listen if we go, yes, there's a Palestinian people, but they started in the 60s. Right? I think that has more chance. And then people go, oh, I didn't know that. I thought they were an ancient people. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.